Our next panel is our good friend Phil Taylor of Mad Ag is moderating a panel of our local grain chain here. So this is our Colorado grain chain. We've got some Front Range, some kind of central, and some Western Slope represented here. The goal of the grain chain here is the entire state and reaching every corner. And I think this panel does a great job of that. So another dear friend and mentor and huge inspiration in our in many ways, but in this local grain chain is Phil Taylor. So I'm going to hand it over to Phil.
All right. Andy, can you see me?
Oh, can I see you? I can see you, Phil.
Sweet. I am in my truck in between two farms right now. And so I feel like this is not only like totally representative of this time of year. Spring has sprung and the earth is awakening, and grains are either in the ground and sprouting, or they're getting planted now or never. And so I'm literally just pulled over here at the Baby Goat in East Boulder between two farms, and really excited about this panel. So I caught a little bit of this morning, a little bit of this afternoon, early afternoon. I really enjoyed that broader cultural look into sourdough and starters. And I mean, it just reminds me of the kind of the humanity that needs to be restored to the entire grain ecosystem and food shed. Swapping sourdough. I mean, I've used Andy's sourdough. I'm not great at tending my sourdough, and so I've had to go to Moxie and get renewals, here and there. So it's been a really cool experience, just the human side. And I think that's really what this next panel is about this sort of rising. I kind of consider it a grain revival. It's a reclaiming of grain out of the industrial commodity system and bringing it back to its roots, back to its story, back to the people, the culture. And I think in that reclaiming, everyone on this panel, who I'll quickly introduce, I think we'll have a lot to say about the sort of the beauty of the humanity of building community and cooperation and collaboration, which is really, I think, reigns in this. It reigns in this community space that we're building together. Andy, I forget whether you were going to run through some pictures and some sort of a guide now.
And so let's see here. I think Kim has it queued up. We'll see who's first here. Looks like Kris. So we've got some photos of Kris and Chris's dad standing in front of an awesome cedar. So
am I on?
Yep, you're on.
You're on.
Okay.
Yeah, and Andy, real quick. Sorry if I'm a little stuttery here, but I'm happy to do introductions, or we can just use this picture thing as quick intros, and we'll dive into the questions.
Yeah, why don't we can just let folks introduce themselves here briefly, and we can roll through the slides. I can't remember the order, but Kim can cue us as to who's after Kris. So welcome, Kris.
How you doing?
Awesome. How are you?
I'm good, except I had my second COVID shot yesterday, and I'm not 100%. So anyway, we started back in the 1970s, and my dad started growing wheat in the San Luis Valley, and he sold the first harvest of wheat to the local elevator and lost his fanny on that. And then the second year he bought a truck and thought that he would cart it up to a mill in Denver and save a little bit more. And so finally he figured out that if he had a mill, then they could grow, market, process, and distribute the product that we were making. And so that's where Mountain Mama started. My mom was called Mountain Mama from a dear friend of ours. And so anyway, that just ends up on the bags. But we've been after it for a long, long time. And I think that the roots of what this grain chain is all about, my mom and dad saw that back, they were old hippies, so they got it. a long time ago. And so anyway, we have continued on. My dad used to grow all the wheat for us. And so he eventually ended up, we have a lot of irons in the fire. He had some organic cattle. We make sausage. He had the farm going, the mill going. He liked to race cars, concert violinist. So anyway, when it came time for him to lighten his load, he decided to sell the farm. And luckily, he was able to find a guy that now grows the majority of all of our wheat and applies by the same growing theories and beliefs that my dad did. And so it's been a very interesting situation to be involved in, to see the transitions through time. I mean, that old Chevy 47 Chevy pickup or 2-ton was what we used to deliver grain in down to northern New Mexico and all of southern Colorado. And Rainbow Natural Foods, when we first started, was just barely starting, and now they're UNFI. And so we've been involved with them. And one thing I'd like to talk about is I've seen these businesses, including Wild Oats, Whole Foods, go from these small grocery store ideas to these massive food entities that, we're basically the same size as we have been all the time. We fluctuate a little bit, but it's just been incredible to see how food has changed from 1970 till right now. And we continue to wrestle with finding our place in the market and our how to get that done. And one thing that I'm so fortunate to be able to be involved in this is the relationships that we have with the bakers out there are as valuable as the wheat that we grow and what we mill. And I love to be on the road delivering, and I love establishing those relationships. For me, we are a piece of the process, and we mill everything fresh to order. We keep no stock. We use local grain. We've gotten involved in the heirloom grain thing, but those are all valuable pieces of what we do. But those relationships with the bakers, that's where the rubber really meets the road for me. Is I love seeing what works for them, what doesn't work for them, what they're talking about. And it's really a cool situation. And if our pricing doesn't work for them, then it doesn't work for anybody. And so we're kind of caught in between. We're a small mill, but we're bigger than a kitchen mill. And we're a hell of a lot smaller than the big, Heartland and all the big mills that are around. So I love the fact that we can mill specifically to order. If somebody wants a coarser ground flour, if they want a finer ground flour, if they're interested in any kind of experimentation, I love being involved in that system. So anyway, that's what we do.
I guess I'll go next. That's my mill. That's on the screen. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay. My name's Hannah Rossman. I am co-owner with my cousin Ben Rossman of Blue Grouse Bread. We're actually in Norwood, Colorado. It says Evergreen on that slide, but we're in Norwood, which is near Telluride. So Norwood's a super rural town. It's about 500 people in our town, but we service Telluride, Montrose, Ridgeway. So a fair number of locations in this corner. But yeah, a little bit about our about me and our bakery. So you can see in this picture our mill. We're actually dressing the stones today, so I took this yesterday or a few days ago. We operate a wholesale only artisan bread bakery. It's all sourdough. From day one, we've been milling 100% or as much as possible of our own whole wheat flour. We work a lot with Kris, so it's awesome that I get to go after him and hear him talk about relationships with his bakers. I mean, a big reason I'm in this is a relationship with our growers and distributors, and it's been awesome to get to know Kris the 5 years that we've been open. But yeah, I grew up in Vermont, which is has a very strong bread culture. I actually grew up down the road from New American Stone Mills. So the mill we have here is made by New American Stone Mills. When I was growing up, it was just Elmore Mountain Bread with different owners, and then Blair and Andrew purchased it and then have expanded it to this incredible company. If you don't know about what they're doing, you should definitely check them out on Instagram. But in high school, my junior year of high school, my public school built a wood-fired community bread oven, and it actually launched a fair number of us into the bread world and oven building world and milling world. So I have to give a shout out to my alma mater, People's Academy. Thanks so much. And when I moved to the Southwest, I realized there's just not a ton of that kind of easy access to high quality artisan sourdough bread. And along with us starting this bakery, my cousin and I, it was sort of along the same time as the fresh milled flour movement was getting going. We had Blair and Andrew at Elmore Mountain Bread as an incredible mentors and business model to help us get started. Sort of a similar thing where we're in a tiny, tiny town, but we are trying to service as many people as possible. So we bake 3 times a week, anywhere from 600 to 900 pieces of bread. So a pretty good size for the number of people that live in our town, I guess. And yeah, through some help from the Telluride Foundation and an EDA grant and West End Economic Development Center out here, we were able to purchase the mill you're seeing in that picture. And we've just been able to mill a lot more flour and also just create, as a result, more relationships with farmers in the area. So a big thing we're about is fresh milled whole grains, and then also just encouraging farmers in our region and our state. I could talk for a long time, but I think that's probably a good enough intro.
Yeah, that's great. We'll cover some of that in our questions following. Awesome intro, though. Andre, take it away.
Hi, I'm Andre Husney of Jacob Springs Farm. Oh, look, there's me with an even bigger beard than I have now. Yeah, so I started farming. Well, I was born in Beirut, Lebanon. I came to this community around Boulder, Colorado, as a 9-year-old who came out of a situation of war and trauma. And part of when I came to the United States, I felt displaced. I felt misunderstood. I didn't really connect with people very well. But what I did connect with was a family farm that was in my neighborhood, and they took me in and taught me to irrigate and to plant and harvest and to train animals, and it saved my life. And it also gave me a chance to fulfill my own need that was born out of my mother's trauma during the war, to be able to be secure in the ability to feed myself and my family and the people around me. That was something that was very important during the war. There were times when people were very worried about where food was going to come from. And so that's something very deep inside of me. And of course, the Lebanese culture that I grew up in is very much a grain culture. And my grandmother is very much about flavor. She would shop with her nose and her taste buds, rather than with her eyes, as we do in our modern supermarkets. And I remember, even at an early age, her dismissing certain types of flour as not tasty enough. not flavorful. And so I've always kind of been in pursuit of flavor when it comes to being a farmer. So I'm joyful to be able to be participating with Andy in growing loaves of bread. It's the way I think about it. I love to look over at my field and say that field is 20,000 loaves of bread, and that field over there might be 5,000 loaves of bread. And it's fun for me to think of it that way, that we can actually feed people, put bread on the table. So I'm really enjoying the local connection that we have. I also am really passionate about how regenerative agriculture can tie in community goals holistically, that we can restore land, we can improve soil fertility over time, we can create systems that close wasteful loops, can reclose loops instead of having them be wasteful, of resources that are precious, like manure and carbon, and then things that have to be brought in and go out of the community. I like to close that loop and bring it home. And so for me, it's about all of those things together. And the grain chain, I like the metaphor of the chain, that it's many different links together, and each one is important and valuable. So that's I'm happy to be a part of that chain. And for me also, it's community. The first field of wheat that I grew right here in Boulder, Colorado, was about half an acre. It was small. I sowed it by hand. I harvested it with a scythe, and we harvested it with a group of about 30 people. We harvested it in a day. We transported it, we threshed it, we winnowed it, we ground it, and we made bread, and we broke bread that evening from the same field. And it was amazing. There were people from all different walks of life that participated, including some priests from the Catholic Church, and they gave us different lessons and analogies of metaphors of wheat that were used in their scriptures. And I just found it a beautiful, beautiful experience of bonding with the community. And I'm kind of in love with that and in search of that ever since that little wheat field that I grew about 8 years ago. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Andre.
My pleasure.
All right, moving along. Michelle, you are next. Can you tell us about Freshly Milled and your broader work in the grain chain, of course?
I'm Michelle Moffett, and I am the owner and miller and marketer and janitor and everything at my mill. I opened the mill last summer, and it is, I'm using a Meadows traditional stone mill, and I'm focusing on heirloom varieties of grains. Right now, it's primarily wheat. And I got into this kind of from a variety of sources, just kind of interests I had kind of led me to this point. My family moved here about 10 years ago from New York City, and I got really interested in the local farm and ag industry. And also I was very interested in the climate and what was happening. And I started to learn about soil health and the interrelationship between farming and soil health and how it relates to our climate. And from there, I just kind of learned more about the local food economy and got to know Phil. Actually, our kids went to kindergarten together, our two daughters. And he pointed out, hey, one thing that's missing from our local food economy is grains. And he just kind of planted that seed in my brain. And I went to grain school for a couple of years, visited a bunch of mills, and just got really excited about the idea of opening a small mill to help support farmers and in our region. And so that's how I got into it. I love it. I think it's fascinating. I learn so much every day, whether it's about grains, about farming, about how bakers use it, about, you know, how to start a business. It's a challenge every day. And being a member of the grain chain has just been a really great opportunity to meet so many people who have the same passion and to be part of a movement to try to reintroduce these grains to the public. And one of the things I'm excited about is how grains impact health as well, and how the different varieties of grains and whole grains can really change somebody's health profile. So that's another avenue I have. But that's pretty much it. I'm starting out, I'm new, I'm small, and it's super fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. Now we have Claudia from Pastificio, an awesome brand that's just beginning to soar. And Claudia, you can take it away from here and introduce us all to your brand and your ambition.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Claudia, and I co-own Pastificio Boulder with Ted. So Pastificio Boulder is a craft pasta company, and we primarily work with heritage and ancient wheat varieties that we try to source as locally as possible. So the majority of the grain that we buy is in berry form, which means that we fresh mill in-house our flours, and we craft the pastas using old world Italian techniques, you know, bronze dies and Italian extruders. We also dry the pasta slowly, you know, it takes between 36 and 48 hours and at low temperature, because we want to retain most flavor and nutrition and structural stability. So we founded Pastificio about 3 years ago. On a more personal note, I have a background in civil engineering, and I worked in construction for 20 years. Then I decided that I had a bigger calling, which is food. My 4 grandparents were born in Italy and moved to Brazil. So I'm from Sao Paulo, Brazil, with very Italian blood. So it's pretty natural that food is part of life. And I can really relate to what Andrea was saying, you know, the community and the idea of sharing food and this emotional load that we have, and especially with real food. So that's what we have been, you know, pursuing and being part of the Colorado grain chain and trying to really revive the way we are eating and try to, you know, change the current food system.
Awesome. Thank you, Claudia. Awesome intros, fantastic pictures, and great to have you all on this panel. I have essentially 2 questions for each panelist before we open it up into a broader conversation over the next 40 minutes. Andy, you can feel free to, I forget exactly when our stop time is, so you'll have to pop in and remind me if we get carried away. I want to back up to Kris. You know, you've been at this with Mountain Mama on your ranch for a long time. You're part of an intergenerational continuation of the vision, and I would love to hear from you a little bit more about how this surge in this kind of grain revival, the formation of the grain chain, consumers sort of starting to buy it, people interested across the economy. You know, how is that looking for you as someone who's been committed to this for a long time? And something that you mentioned in your intro was sort of your dad's theory and principles. And I'd be curious if you could sort of speak a little bit to what you're seeing as a long-time player and what excites you, what challenges you, and then maybe speaking about your dad's kind of theories and principles. I'm curious to hear about that continuation in your work. You might need to unmute Kris if you are muted.
There we go.
Awesome.
Okay. the very first thing on my dad's list was environmental issues. And we've been fighting water grabs here for almost as long as when we first moved here. So he's been highly in tune with the environmental impacts, and what he thought was a big impact has totally become this huge monster now with global warming. He was always concerned about the health of the earth or of the soil, and did a lot of studies, a lot of developing the health of that soil, rotations and stuff like that. But when we first started, I remember coming out of the late 60s into the early 70s, there were a ton of people just like us, baking great bread, making bread at their home. They were involved on that level. And then we saw food totally change to these pre-mixed ideas of, you have a bakery at Safeway, but they get frozen dough in, or they get frozen this and that and throw it in an oven and they call it a bakery. So if you're not in that chain, you miss out on that process. And so for a long time, I mean, we just scrapped. And luckily, some of our accounts that have been with us for 25 years have stuck with us. And I go back to those relationships, but now those guys are big now, and we've kind of wiggled our way into that system. And always it's been about the quality of the product, the health of the earth, the things that they believed, my mom and dad believed in the very beginning. And so I would say in the last 10 years, I've seen more incredible bakers come out of the woodwork from all over, and start to, and with Nana's help, you get caught up in the sweep of all of this energy that's going on. And it is really, really curious to me how this plays out on a market sense, and how we all fit in making great food for people that's economical, that is healthy for them, and I love that fight that's going on right now between like us and great big mills, and then I'll be delivering in bakeries like Hannah, and I mean there's a few that are just amazing. Andre down in Taos, Sage Bakehouse, these are all really great bakeries, and they're at a point, I've always felt like they've got my back no matter what. And I also have their back, because I'll go back to what I said in the very beginning. I can't call these guys and say, we're grinding a bag of flour and it's going to be $50 a bag. And it can happen. It can, but I'm just filling you in on some of the latest, like the last 3 or 4 years of getting involved in growing heirloom grain, marketing, milling it, packaging it. We're a little bit of a piece of the puzzle, but those guys that are baking it and put it in a loaf are the end of whether it works for them or not. And so what we found is our standard wheat that we've always had, which is high protein, hard red wheat. We've also got a soft white pastry wheat that we grow. And those have been our mainstays. I've gotten involved in the spelt program with Tyler, and we're bringing that in. We have worked with some rye growers, and we're seeing that move to an incredible interest in that kind of blindsided me. And then we grew some Rouge de Bordeaux, which I've got it's beautiful, beautiful wheat, but I've got a full bin of it, and I'm selling it, in 25-pound lots here and there. Mm-hmm. But I need, it's just interesting to see the market, who's dabbling in it, who can bank on it,
Yeah.
who's invested, and who can move it into a bread and market it on their end to make it work. And it's that chain that we all talk about. It is truly a chain. And when somebody steps out of their line and breaks the chain in some way, shape, or form, we talked about the market impacts of that. It really leaves a lot of people out of grain or of product. And I've run into that. So
I'm seeing Hannah shake her head yes as you're talking. I would love to hear, more about this sort of, I've got your back, you've got my back. I'm hearing relationship as a common thread through everyone's conversations here. And I would love for Hannah maybe just to expand a little bit about sort of how you see partnerships between your sourcing, your growers. What does a good day look like and feel like? Where are the hard patches? Can you always get your flour, and how does that relationship look like in good times and bad times?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot to tackle. I think it's like a 3-minute subject.
Yeah,
time,
I was gonna ask you what was your inspiration, but you kind of covered that, so I thought I would
we'll talk. No, I'd love to expand more on what Kris is talking about. So yeah, we probably the bulk of our wheat berries we buy through Kris, because he is so consistent. He always has enough product, and he's extremely open about his pricing. And as he's talking about, is very trustworthy. And I think being part of this grain chain, being linked with each other, is a really important topic to talk about as we're sort of like seeing this exponential growth. And it's like, well, how do we do this in a way where we're supporting everyone in the chain? And I think as an owner of a bakery, I feel very responsible for the financial health of our suppliers. And so having like clear answers and clear quantities for our growers, that's sort of like a big challenge right now. Is like, how much can we do? Like, while our business is still growing, et cetera, what varieties will we need? Because these guys are making decisions a year in advance based on like our quantities. So Kris has been so easy for us to start with because he has been in the game for a long time. So we are so lucky to have him. And because of our consistency with him, we're kind of able to start conversations with people more close in our community. Kris is about, I think, a little under 200 miles away from us, but we're super lucky. We have a farmer in Norwood who's 2 miles from the bakery who's growing a specific type of grain for us that we use for one type of bread. So I think a big responsibility I feel is to figure out how to market these different grains and how to be supportive for our farmers. And I think a big part of that is being upfront and clear about what we can buy from them. And then I personally feel a responsibility to help them link with other people in the state, because we can buy a certain amount from Kris, and then we can buy a certain amount from the Maroff Ranches in Norwood and from Tyler Wilbanks in Mancos. But I just want them to reach everybody else in the state. So I forgot to mention, I'm also on the board of the Colorado Grain Chain. And a big reason for that is because we are pretty isolated and rural down here. And like, how do we connect everyone to each other? And I think a big part of that when we're talking about like challenges, it's like transportation, equipment, cleaning equipment. And I think Michelle will probably talk some of that too. But yeah, that's kind of, I guess, the challenges and fun and fulfilling part of the work we do here at Blue Grouse.
Awesome. Yeah, there's so much in that I could keep asking. I think before we jump into more upstream supply or downstream supply shed processing, I'm curious, Andre, to kind of hear more about your, you run a really highly diversified farm where grains are a piece of the farm ecosystem. And you mentioned regenerative ag and sort of the restoration of soil health, restoration of community. Could you speak a little bit more about sort of, what does that actually look like? Is that cover cropping? Is it livestock integration? Is it, what does that regeneration of society look like, from a grain perspective?
Yeah, I think the holistic aspect of it is critical for regeneration, from an agricultural point of view, and also regenerating a local food economy we have to have lots of things. So one of the things that I sell, one of the things that Andy is most excited about buying from me is butter. So we milk cows, and bread and butter, they go together. And so we milk cows, and when we have extra milk, we cream it and we make butter. And the cows also produce quite a large amount of poo. I saw in the comments, I'll just kind of say, organic a lot of times is defined by what you don't do. And regenerative is, let's not do those things that we shouldn't do, but let's also focus on what we do and also the do that we put on the soil, so that the dairy is synergistic with the grain field, because we need manure to really properly amend the soil. And then as we produce grain, straw is a wonderful byproduct that we use also in the dairy, and also for the vegetable program, and also for the chickens. When we clean grains, because we don't have really high scale, high throughput, really efficient equipment, we may end up with a lot of extra grain in with the stones and the chaff, that we just don't have the equipment or whatever to be able to get those percentages of improvement. But then we can recycle that through the chicken program. And then the chickens can help us with, when we're grazing the animals on our rotations, the chickens can take they're very motivated to take a cow patty and turn it into a square yard of amazing fertility rather than a dead spot, because they're looking through the manure for grains. If we just feed some handfuls of whole grains to cows, it really incentivizes the chickens to help to look for the grains that made it through the rumen and through the digestive system, and to take that manure and spread it out. And then there's all these feedback loops, because when you have chickens doing that, they're also looking for the worms, and they'll reduce the fly counts, which just help everything. So to me, these systems, the more parts of them, so we have economies of scale at work in the conventional grain system. Economies of scale help you bring the price of something down. But what we have going for us in the local food system is not economies of scale, but economies of scope. So if we can broaden our scope, if we can add butter to bread, if we can add eggs and add honey, we not only do we have ecological benefits, but we also have economic benefits. What Andy really has, besides a great bakery, is he has a great connection to customers and to individuals in our community. And once we have that conduit open, we can increase the scope of it. We don't want to have 100,000 customers, maybe Andy does, but we want to take the 2,000 customers that we have, or whatever the number is, and broaden the depth and the scope of our relationship with them. Natural systems are powerful because of their scope. So, a handful of dirt has so many different kinds of interactions of different kinds of organisms that do different things, and each one is perfectly suited, adapted, designed for its particular role within that system. And so just as the faces on this screen are doing different things, that diversity brings us strength. Cultural diversity brings us strength. Functional role diversity and natural diversity brings us strength. So that's,
man. Well, I'm glad this is recorded, because what you just said needs to be written in words and shared. I feel like it was so beautifully put. Just the strength of a healthy system. Like an inefficiency in one place is efficient in another. At a macro scale, you have this beautiful closed system where, in the industrial system, inefficiencies, generate climate change. They generate, environmental degradation. But in the way that you describe your ecosystem, you're actually capturing what it is an inefficiency in one place becomes a benefit in another. Really, really cool, man. We're going to circle a little bit back to some of those thoughts. I wanted, you mentioned the sort of the importance of equipment, and Michelle, Mad Ag has used Michelle's grain cleaner a lot in the back of her barn, and spent a lot of hours in the middle of winter, cleaning grains and losing grains and having mostly a lot of fun. And I'm curious, Michelle, if you can sort of talk with us a little bit about, Freshly Milled as a brand, but you're doing so much more by enabling the community to use those resources like the grain cleaner. Can you kind of talk about that, that nature of how you see supporting, how you've been supported in this kind of cooperative lift of the grain chain?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. I mean, I think what's interesting here is, the theme that's throughout all of this is community. And, Phil, you planted that seed in my brain for this. And yes, I have a grain cleaner and I've made it available to people, but I feel like that's just a tiny thing. I've been so supported on the other side in getting this business started and launched. Andy has talked to me at length about mills. He's hooked me up with farmers, with grain. He's got a mill business himself, but he's been nothing but supportive and open and helpful with that. I have a small farm in Longmont, and I also do a little bit of grain growing there. But I'm not a farmer. And so I've been totally supported by farmers, John Ellis and John Schlegel, to help me get my seed planted, my fields plowed, drilled in, and harvesting. It's amazing what I feel like the community has given to I feel like where I sit, so many people want to see heirloom grains back. They want to see this grain chain built so that people can have a direct relationship to their food, to know where it came from, who the farmer was, to be able to meet them. And so, I feel like, yes, I've helped out with my grain cleaner, but I've been far more been the recipient of support. And it's just a small thing I can do. And it's been really fun too. I was lucky. I was looking for a grain cleaner for the mill. This is before I even, decided to plant a small field. And I found one on Craigslist, which was super lucky. And there was a picture of it in the intro. It's a Farmstead 150. It's a small little, it's got 3 screens and a fan, and you can do a few 100 pounds an hour, and it works pretty well. But when I've seen other seed cleaners that are more automated, and I'm always like a little envious, like, wow, how does that work? But it's been great to be able to share it with Mad Ag, because what it's done is allowed other farmers a little bit of security that they can grow and they can get their seed cleaned. And what I see as some of the challenges to getting the grain economy going are some of these, capital equipment pieces. Combining is really hard. If somebody has just 1 or 2 acres, finding a way to harvest that is really hard. I'm just fortunate that John Ellis is in the farm across the street from me, and he has his, Allis Chalmers 1940 pull behind combine there, and he's willing to help me with that. So I feel like, one of the things that the grain chain has talked about, I know we've talked about it with Mad Ag, and it's a discussion in the community, is some kind of equipment sharing or equipment leasing, so that you can be a smaller scale farmer and you don't have to make this big investment in a combine and keeping it serviced and operating. And there are existing farm equipment co-ops out there. It does take capital, membership and resources, people to, manage the finances of the co-op, and to, get loans to buy the equipment and to track who has the equipment out and, is maintaining it. But I think that's something that if we can get it started, could help a lot more farmers get into this, because I think there's a lot of people who are interested in growing the grains and bringing back these different varieties. But there's, capital investment hurdles there that are difficult.
Yeah, no, right on. Yeah, I think that, you're touching on so much of, I think, what needs to happen to lift this in a way that, not one person is trying to hold it all, and the swapping of equipment has been really beautiful to see across this Front Range community. I mean, if you, I think of Eric Skokin's combine, like within 15 minutes of showing up in the farm, you're probably driving it, and he's teaching, and it's just kind of an amazing, you know, generosity that I've seen throughout. Claudia, there's go
So
ahead.
can I just jump in? I want to say, and that's where the joy comes from. That's where
No doubt.
that's where the real joy
doubt.
comes from. And Kris, your comment about, you know, Rainbow turning into Unify and all of these huge grocery stores, and, you know, yeah, they're great stories of, I guess, entrepreneurial, you know, capitalism and growth and business success stories, right?
Right.
But I also have no desire to, we actually keep growing, but I have no desire to grow. I love being small in a local community bakery, and I love going to Andre's farm and knocking on his door and saying, "Where's my damn butter? You said I," you know, he's like, "Well, it's going to be another couple weeks." I'm like, "Give me butter." And then we play a song, and then he lets me drive his tractor. And then, you know, but that's, very few people ever say, "Geez, I just want to grow super big and get disconnected from everything and vendors."
It's amazing. So we used to deliver a couple pallets of flour to the Whole Foods in Santa Fe. And we got that account through bakers that we've been involved with forever down in Santa Fe. Well, one of them started working at Whole Foods. And as soon as corporate came in and saw a product that they hadn't approved in Texas, they said, "This can't happen anymore." And so that kind of wrangling and big business is brutal. And I don't want to be a part of that at all.
No, it's the relationships, and those relationships, you know, when we talk about the chain, it reminds me of, you know, kind of youth group team building exercises where you all hold hands in a circle and you lean back. You know, it's like, okay, don't let go of my hand, Kris, because I'll fall. You know,
Yeah,
it's a very real thing. What was the baker, Zuby Wilson?
yes, it was.
Yeah, Zuby, good man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I also think, to Michelle's point, you know, yeah, none of the stuff's cheap. You know, even a used, you know, seed cleaner, you know, is at multiple $1,000s, and you know, none of us are probably buying $400,000 John Deere combines per se, but it doesn't have to break the piggy bank when you're doing small local circles and you're only looking to do, you know, our flour mill does about 2,000 pounds a week, and half of that's for our own bakery. So we sell 1,000 pounds to the public, and, you know, we have this bunch of old mills that I got for free or rehabbed or cheap. And it doesn't, you know, it doesn't have to be this big, expensive, hairy, scary beast.
Right, right. The one thing too, though, to consider is the market where you guys are at is amazing. I mean, you have an incredible amount of people just walking the streets. And here I spend all my time in a truck trying to deliver to places like that, you know?
No doubt. Yeah, Kris. Yeah, I totally agree. Colton from Dry Storage literally just walked by and grabbed a coffee out of this cafe.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the grain chain is kind of everywhere, you know.
Well, and like, to be honest with you, Colton and those guys and some of that affecting the market right now is tough. It's tough for us because the prices that can be paid up there are different than the price that Hannah can pay or that Sage is going to pay, or, you know, all these others. So once again, when we're talking about linking this all together and understanding where we're all at, I don't know what the answers are, but I do know it's a wrestling match.
Another great opportunity that exists that I've recently discovered is a lot of chefs are bringing in boutique grain from out of state, you know, in 3 or 5 pound quantities, and they're paying $20 or $30 for like a 3-pounder, and it's only because they don't know about you and they don't know about Michelle, right? And so go cruise through downtown Denver with you know, sample bags of flour and hit these, you know, beautiful new you know, high-end restaurants and get them off of their, you know, I've talked to many restaurateurs who will pay like $500 for a few months worth of a grain that is grown right down the street, and they just don't know about it because there's just,
and what I would say too is that, you know, this is another form of diversity, that we have these different economies that we live in, and, you know, come and share our customers because you don't have to pay the land prices that we do. I mean, I couldn't afford to buy it, and if I were to buy a 5-acre field, it would be $2 or $3 million in my area, and so we can't even meet our market to its full potential.
Oh, absolutely.
So
yeah.
we need you too. And
the other thing I want to say though too is, and this has been a huge change in the San Luis Valley in the last 15 years, is the amount of water available, and it's not getting pumped out. This is drought stuff that's just happened through time. So what it takes our farmers to grow wheat now is a lot more money because of the well fees, the water fees that are coming in. They're starting to shut down fields because they're trying to conserve and protect the aquifer that's available here. In doing that, this valley used to be covered in wheat, barley, and potatoes, some alfalfa. So if you're paying more, commodity wheat has never gone up in price anyway. So that is gone now. And we've got a ton of organic grain available here because that price point can help pay the gig, that farmers need to get. But I am seeing a little bit of a bottleneck starting to happen where farmers are scrapping for the thing that is going to profit them the most and be the least amount of input that they can. And so wheat definitely plays the game. And I think this ancient grain, heirloom grain program is something that can wiggle its way into at least our area and become a sufficient supply of some of this stuff. So, I mean, I'm positive about it, but the water thing is a huge issue down here.
No doubt, Kris. Yeah, I mean, a couple of themes coming up for me are just the one is the sort of appropriate kind of contracting. How do we live with? How do we have each other's back? And what we've learned at Mad Ag is we have a mutually beneficial contracting program where we bring the farmer and the buyer together and we say, hey, here's what agronomically has to work for the farmer to be in business, and here's the elasticity that you have in your balance sheet at the bakery or the buyer level. And then we just have an open conversation in front of a whiteboard and Excel sheets going, how can we do this together for a win-win? And we've just been kind of practicing that, and because what we've learned is, and I think maybe the grain chain, in various ways has done this. I'm thinking back to an event that Andy had at Moxie where we introduced sort of accidentally growers and buyers at this kind of, and I just, maybe we should do more of that, where those relationships can be kindled and those economics are less on they're built around unique relationships where we know the farmer's need, we know the buyer's need. And I'd be curious to hear from Claudia a little bit around, bakeries, your CPG brand, they lie in this space between, the grower and the eater, the food lover. And how do you kind of see that kind of price point? How do you work with farmers in that sourcing? And, if it's $1 a pound, you're like, ooh, I could do maybe one SKU on that, or just like walk me through your thinking around how you think about sort of pricing and product development and ultimately quality, right? I mean, I think of, what's the quality of the grain and how's that reflected in the healthy food you're bringing? It's a bit of an open landscape for you, Claudia, but I don't know if you have some salient thoughts in that space.
Yeah, we as we are growing, can you guys hear?
You sound great.
Okay. So as we are growing, we're learning how to do this. At this point, this collaboration with the farmers, it's basically the very essence of our business. Since we are kind of in the middle between the consumers and the farmers, we are more and more realizing that there is this beautiful story to be told, and that a lot of people are really craving the story of the farmer and our connection with food and the land. So as we started, there was very few farmers available growing those kinds of wheat. So we're like, okay, how much do you charge wholesale? And that's how much we're going to do. And we are going to calculate our prices based on how much we're paying. Everyone needs to make money, right? So since we are in this CPG of a unique food, there are very few pasta makers right now using heritage varieties of wheat. If we just look in Colorado, we are pretty much the only one doing this. So people are more open-minded about paying a little more for good food. And as we are growing, in the past, Aspen Moon Farm has been the only one selling the heritage varieties to us. And as we are growing, we are getting other farmers to collaborate with us and grow different kinds of varieties. And we can be more, transparent and open in terms of pricing. But as everyone here knows, is food in America is not priced correctly. And it's cheap food, and it's basically, there's no nutrition, it's just crap. So if you want real food and you want to invest in environment, if you want to invest in your health, you got to spend a little more. So we are trying to figure out, and as it's happening, we are doing different collaborations. There's a farmer, the Lewis Farm, family farm, trying different durums for us, and Phil knows, has been helping us with that. Andy and the Colorado Grain Chain has been helping us with other varieties. Aspen Moon is trying more durum, and actually it's their first year. So yes, we are learning too, and I think just being transparent and have that open communication beforehand, as Hannah said a year before, and say, I need that. We can pay this. How much do you want to charge? I think that's
it's cool to just, I think everyone on this call is sort of, there's an element of like taking courage, and we feel like we're working from a virtuous spot to create something that creates win-wins for the land, for the farmer, for our company. And I think that tension that you're describing of how you are sort of building the ship as you sail, the art of that. I'm curious to hear a little bit more from Hannah on how you live in that kind of dynamic tension between, sourcing and supply, and then demand, and what's the sort of art and challenge of linking those two. I mean, if you get a new wholesale account, in the middle of the summer, or do you call people for grain to see if they have stuff in a bin? What's your sort of your art of growth, linking supply and demand together?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So an example would be the farmer that we have that's in Norwood, 2 miles from the bakery, Maroff Ranches. They used to grow grain for animal feed, and I approached them and said, hey, would you consider growing for human consumption? And was just tried to be very transparent with them. This is how much we could potentially use. But having that discussion and sort of giving a commitment to a quantity that we will buy. And as a business, knowing, even if we have to work really hard to figure out where to send it, we're going to buy that because they're growing for us, and they are how we're going to survive as a community. So I think the way that we've done that too is just through some marketing, like, okay, you guys grew this much, this is how much you harvested. They ended up getting a higher yield than we thought. So we were like, cool, let's create this bread that is just your grain, so we can like move it by the time that you need to, that you're ready to supply us again. So we did that, and just really tried, like Claudia said, to tell the story, which I think helps. Whole grain breads are already a challenge to sell to a lot of people, especially in a sort of more rural area. We are lucky that we have Telluride as one of our sourcing areas, so we kind of have like a pretty diverse buying market here. But yeah, I think just knowing that we are, like Kris said, it's our responsibility sort of at the end, and figuring out. It's just like always looking at where can we make this balance work if our number one goal is supporting our community and supporting our farms. So it might not always be that profitability is the number one goal, but I think just having those relationships and making sure we're taking care of each other is really important. I hope that answered the question.
It's a beautiful answer, and we're gonna have to wrap there. Andy's playing his banjo guitar thing, and
Banjo breakdown, busted up, people.
yeah, take it away, Andy.
Last call.
Yeah, well, it was awesome. Andre's waving his hand.
Andre, what do you got?
I just had one more thing I'd like to say to maybe tie it back to the violence that happened in our community just a few days ago. And Andy started off the whole thing talking about this. And I think it's appropriate that we don't put a lot of focus on the shooter, but that person was deeply broken and disturbed, and also came from a war zone in the Middle East like I did as a child. That person didn't have the same level of connection with community, and didn't have the same kind of healing that I was fortunate enough to have. And I just wanted to put that out there, because when I found out about that person, it made me just think that how many broken, hurting people can we connect with and love on through food. For me, it was through farming, through fields and nature, that put me back together in a way. And I just wanted to speak to that, because I think that everything that we're talking about here is not a luxury. It is a necessity, and it does feed our bodies. But these kinds of connections and community that we have also are really important for putting us back together in a personal and in a spiritual and an emotional way. And I just want to put that out there, that just look out for the people that are disenfranchised and hurting and falling apart that are around us. Thank you.
Beautifully said, Andre. That's a great closing word. I'm glad you jumped in and left us with that insight and bit of wisdom. I couldn't agree more. And that's really the power of the grain chain, is building that community and offering us all opportunities to really help heal a broken world. And so I appreciate it, Andre. Thank you. And thanks to all the panelists. I'm going to hand it back over to Andre now. I thought it was an awesome panel. We just got through most of our questions, and look forward to seeing you all in the fields and the farms.
Phil, thanks so much. Thanks to everyone on this panel. I'm going to propose and put a challenge out there to Kris and Claudia and Michelle and all of us on this panel. Obviously, I feel like a therapist when a marriage therapist, when the couple starts fighting and stuff sort of heats up and they say, good, this is where we want to be. This is what we should talk about. And I feel like we've got, cost, right? We have, how much can a farmer get for the wheat? That's a huge thing. Competitive pressure of other mills and farmers entering into the community and, maybe diluting costs and taking business away. We've got, advocating whole grain and trying to convince people that eating the grain in its whole state is what we should be doing for flavor and nutrition and for smart farming. So I think, the grain chain has come a long way in these past couple of years and in the past 30 or 40 years. But I'm going to propose a follow-up working group where we can talk about, okay, great, we've made it this far. Now what, So super good conversation.
That's great.
Yeah. And Kris, thank you to you and your family for, just forging the way for so long.
It's a pleasure.
You're
Really
a rock star. I wish I knew a Zeppelin song.
No doubt, Kris. No doubt.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Wonderful to be involved.
Well, thanks, guys.